Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy and another walk and talk. This time not in the morning, it's actually about, oh geez, what is it? 3:30 in the afternoon. And we're going to do things a little bit differently today. Instead of walking and talking about the Badgers around the neighborhood, we actually have a destination to reach with this walk and talk. I am on my way to Gentofte, which is a suburb of Copenhagen, to Gentofte Stadium to watch the Danish men's national team in American football take on Hungary in a European Championship placement tournament game. Essentially, Denmark is playing for a chance to get fifth place in the tournament. And got a couple of my former players there. One of my current players, my starting wide receiver, is on the team. I think they're only using him as a kicker, but go figure. So, thought we could still walk and talk about Wisconsin football, but instead of just seeing the sights around the neighborhood, we can see the sights traveling through my adopted home country. Alright, so what are we going to talk about? Well, obviously, fall camp has started, and like clockwork, we start hearing about position battles and stuff at camp and how players are being used, even though it's only been 3 practices and people are starting to push towards panic mode. So I want to first pump the brakes on a couple potential problems that are rising for fans, but at the end of the day might be a good thing for the team in general. Off the train, so let's talk about the first panic point and why it's not a big deal. And again, we're 3 practices in, and AJ Blazik is switching up the offensive line and putting what everybody assumed was the presumptive starter, David Heidenson, at guard, and putting Joe Brunner at left tackle. And a lot of people are talking about that as we went out to the transfer portal, we got this guy to be the starting left tackle, and he's failing already. Well, no. As you can see with the lineups being used, we're early in camp. We're 3 weeks, 4 weeks from our first game? They're just trying to find what constellation of players makes the best lineup. And I don't care if Heinson's playing guard or tackle. I want the best starting 5. And that should not be any kind of bad thing. We lost a starter. A starter needs to be replaced. When you have offensive linemen who have versatility, it allows you to try to maximize the group you have so that group can be consistent. When that group is consistent, you can game plan around it. And that might mean moving some people around, but you're going to end up getting the best 5 out there, which is all that's important in a situation like this. Now, same thing can be said with the backup quarterback job. I was probably one of them, thinking when Hunter Simmons came in, first thing everyone's like, who the hell is this guy? And okay, he's just going to be a camp arm, but it's actually smart to try to get him comfortable with the system, see what he's got, so then we can preserve a red shirt for Daniel Bryant. By doing that, you gain an extra year of having Daniel Neal, brain fart over. Yes. So what this means is, if we get a situation where, God forbid, Billy Edwards Jr. goes down for an extended period of time, we have two quarterbacks to fill the job. And we have the ability to mix and match, and we have the ability to see what gives us best for the situation right now, and while preserving the long-term health of the QB room. The QB room has needed to be rebuilt. The QB room needs to get back to having its stagger of players at different age groups, and it's going to add stability for the long run. And that is something that we sorely need for the entire roster, but the quarterback position especially, so we don't get in a situation where we are late in the season and we have to play a freshman because that's all we have. And we don't want to have that happen again. We don't want to have another Braden Locke situation. So I'd rather if Hunter can give some quality reps that could then be translated into garbage time reps later, that we don't have to waste Danny O'Neal and give up the ability for him to have a red shirt and gain an extra year of eligibility, all the better. And that's what this program needs. It's the stability that having that kind of flexibility has, but it is the mindset of having a plan of what to do with that quarterback position. All right, and we are pulling up to Gentofte Stadium. It wouldn't look like a stadium. If you didn't know it was a stadium, you wouldn't think it was one from the outside, but that's a very Danish thing. Fun fact, Metallica played here back in 1993. Like 40,000 people were in the stadium. It's been renovated since then, but it's sort of the national stadium for American football in Denmark. All right, let's get inside.
All right, that'll give a little commentary on some of these clips that I picked up throughout the game. Obviously didn't film the entire game. We wanted to actually take the opportunity to watch football recreationally, which is something I actually don't get to do that often. So here's a good chance. Got to support some of my current and former players in this game. And watching national team football is always interesting, just to see how these teams are put together in 2 or 3 practices, really. And I love watching a team like Denmark that has a pretty established football community, football culture, play against an Eastern European team, maybe a smaller football country like Hungary. Because what you're gonna see a lot with teams like this is a lot of athletic ability. I mean, you would be surprised. You look at the Olympics and the medals that some of these smaller countries get, and then you look at the actual population sizes, and they produce a ton of athletes. And in a sport, a minority sport in a smaller football country like Hungary, they have talent. You're going to see that throughout this game. A couple players in particular I'm really like watching. 84-14, their quarterback, some tough guys. So here I filmed the first full Hungarian series, from I think it's the second play of the game. Just kind of watching. I like watching how offenses are put together in short periods of time. And I really like the Hungarian approach here. Denmark is supposed to be big, strong, and they spread things out. And they have playmakers on the edges, and a lot of empty formations, a lot of motion, and I thought did a pretty good job. And coming up here, a little slant. Oh, it's passing. All right, first Danish series. This was a quick 3 and out, and I think this really quieted the crowd because they didn't expect this game to be that tight early on. And they came out running the ball, something that I was expecting. The Danish head coach is actually a Swedish player who spent time at Marshall. He was there 4 years at Marshall, was a starter, ended up going to training camp with the Dallas Cowboys as an offensive lineman. So you'd expect a heavy run team. They weren't as much as I had thought, but eventually the bigger, stronger offensive and defensive line took over. But again, some pretty good plays being made here. All right, at this point, game 7-7. Hungary's back out. Again, another empty formation. A little shallow screen. I like that. Where it looks like mesh, but we're just getting offensive linemen out in front. They ran a lot of really nice screens in this game. Again, just to let that pressure get upfield. You know, Denmark would get a pretty good pass rush. That ball gets out of bounds. This is towards the end of the game where Denmark was up by 9 points. I think we're under 2 minutes left, under a minute and a half, I think, at this point. And Hungary is trying to get the ball downfield quickly to get the under 2 scores, get a chance for a field goal to win the game. They do a pretty good job here in the 2-minute drill. Again, just getting the ball out in space. Quarterback being smart here, get the yards, get out of bounds. Stop the clock. Reset, get lined up again. Got some Danish defenders with hands on their knees. They're getting tired. And again, ballsy call here. I don't think they had any timeouts left at this point. Go backdoor screen for the touchdown to get the game back within 2 points. They got the extra point there. And now they're coming up for the final onside kick attempt. And they didn't get it. In fact, Denmark goes ahead and ices it right here. So, that's it.
All right, with that failed onside kick, Denmark's basically running out the clock now. But it was a really good game. Didn't film as much as I wanted to, because when you get situations like this where the entire football world of Denmark comes together, see a lot of old friends, a lot of people we haven't seen in a long time. So spent more time socializing, but got some good clips of the game. Might do a little bit of running commentary. Depends on how they look when I get home. But now the long journey back home begins. All right, off the train now, and we're in the home stretch. So got a few minutes we can go through a couple things here real quick. One that I did want to talk about is I actually got a question on Twitter literally as I was on the train here within the last hour or so, asking about the different, when to use a 2-point or 3-point stance for offensive line. What is the determining factor in choosing that? And I responded the best I could with the character limitations, but thought I'd give a second here to give a little bit more detail into that. So when do you use a 2-point stance? When do you use a 3-point stance? Well, the first things first, it comes down to the personal preference of the OC/offensive coordinator in determining what they feel like works best for their system. And what I mean by that, 3-point stance or 2-point stance each have their individual benefits, and they also have their negative aspects. And some coaches prefer that you just stay in one because the positives outweigh the negatives enough that you have a balanced attack. So that's first and foremost. Most coaches will use a hybrid, and they will use they'll use 2-point stance in both pass and run situations, as long as it gives them the advantage that they're looking for. And to me, I think a big thing that people don't realize is how much people don't pay attention to how you're standing in your stance, how you're lined up. You would think people would, and you would think that it would be a tell, but a lot of times coaches will change, have their tackle standing up in a big, sit up 2-point stance in passing situations because, well, everybody knows it's a passing situation, so you're not giving up an advantage by changing your stance. Same thing in short yardage situations. If you're going to go in a 4-point stance to get low and really drive through a stance. So it all comes down to personal preference. It all comes down to what works best for your offense. 2-point stance, you're going to have better vision. You're going to have better lateral movement. You're going to have better movement backwards. 3-point stance, you're going to get your center of gravity lower. You're going to be able to fire off more vertically, straight, with more power. The trade-off is you don't have the lateral movement and truck. There we go. You don't have the lateral movement, and the tendency sometimes if you get that center of gravity too low, it limits your ability to move side to side. Obviously, the disadvantages of a 2-point is your center of gravity is higher, so your footwork is going to have to be more precise in order to execute forward movement, etc. Me personally, I try to stick in a 2-point with my entire offensive line. Situationally, we'll go into 3. A lot of times I like going into 3 just to have a situation where I can get a defense to jump off sides by having everybody snap down in a 3-point stance at the same time. You'd be amazed at how much you can get away with doing that. So all comes down to preference of the coach and what he can coach up and what he can teach. All right. And because of trying to avoid as much noise as possible, I'm a lot closer to home at this point than I thought I was going to be. So don't have time to go through any more questions right now, but we are going to take a second to briefly talk about what's happening with the channel. As you may have read on Substack or on Twitter yesterday, I'm going to lose access to the All-22 film here. It's by the time you're seeing this, it's already gone. And it comes down to, it's nobody's fault. It just comes down to the person who gave me the access. Think Netflix and password sharing. And, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. Nobody wants to get in trouble for sharing passwords. So it is what it is. I'm looking at potential options of getting All-22 again. There could be some potential options, but we're going to assume right now that we're going back to the broadcast angle for the game film. And that is obviously going to change some of the plans that I had in terms of what I'm going to upload, when I'm going to upload, etc. So I'm going to have a think here in the next couple of weeks about what we actually want to do with the film portion of Dare Raid going in for the 2025 season. Obviously, I want to continue to do it, but it is pain in the butt to find copies of the broadcast film, cutting it up, cutting out the commercials, cutting out the timeouts, etc., uploading it, and getting something useful out of it. So that might change my process in terms of doing the film. But we're not going to go away. We're not going to stop doing this. If you got suggestions of types of content we can use, what we can do here on the channel without the film, I'm all for it. Obviously, I'm not a pundit. I don't want to go too far down that road, but sometimes there's opinions that you guys like hearing. Sometimes we could do things like the classroom sessions and the install sessions and interviews, whatever you want to do. There's things that we could do that go beyond just the film. So that's where we are. Let's see how it goes. Got a few weeks here to try to figure out a solution But till then, walking up to the door right now. So we'll call it here. Thanks for coming on the ride with me to the game. Thanks for watching. See you next time.